Thank you all for being here, carving time out of your busy weekend. My name is Marisa Bolivar, and I'm a registered dietitian and nutritionist. And I am excited to be here today discussing oncology nutrition and health optimization. I'm currently teaching nutrition and food science at Cal Poly, and I'm also working on a doctorate in clinical nutrition. But oncology is truly my first love. And I've really developed a deep appreciation for the tool set that it has provided me in helping people treat and prevent and even recover from their cancer journey. So an interest in oncology nutrition really first began when my dad got diagnosed with cancer. I was in graduate school at the time on the East Coast, and they're here in California. It was a really hard time for my family, and I was like waist deep in grad school. It was really hard to take a lot of time to come home during that period. And it was a challenging thing for my parents to navigate. My dad is recovered, but it was actually an oncology dietitian who inspired the most positive change in his lifetime during that period. And it really changed the trajectory of his whole life. It, I think, transformed him into just a healthier person. His eating habits changed radically. He became a very dedicated physical activity person. I wouldn't always say it's sustained activity. It's more like just being an active person. She was a really inspiring professional, and it inspired me to consider that as a career path. So that's what I ended up moving forward with. So after completing my licensure to become a dietitian and a master's in nutrition, I went on to pursue a board certification in oncology nutrition. And that allowed me a lot of hours in the years that followed working with cancer patients one-on-one. These were patients who had been newly diagnosed or who were undergoing hard periods of time in their treatment or just recovering and wanting to decrease their risk of recurrence. And it allowed me a lot of great opportunity to see how that cancer journey really affected their life. And that is, I would say, kind of what has really inspired me with nutrition, because nutrition was so empowering for them. It was just a tool set that they could really utilize to optimize their health, both at that time and moving forward. So that is my aim today. I want everyone in this room to feel really empowered, to be an educated consumer, and then you get to decide what to do with the rest. So here's a little outline of what we're going to be covering today. First, I'd like to share a couple of insightful quotes, and then we're going to discuss where our most reliable and credible information originates in the field of cancer nutrition. And then that's going to lead us into our focus today, what we call the top 10 dietary and lifestyle factors of cancer survivorship. And then we're going to close our discussion with my own top 10 tips for health optimization, some fun cancer-fighting foods, and some final considerations on the mind-body connection. I do want to encourage you to hang tight onto your questions just so we can get through the material in the most efficient way possible. And then at the end, I'd love to answer whatever questions I can. I also wanted to mention the farm to you. These are two friends of mine that are cultivating the fertile soil of the Templeton Hills Community Farm. It's right there. So if you're new to this class or new to the farm, I'd love to invite you to go up there after we're done and check it out. It's been such a wonderful asset to our North County, and it's open to the public and has lots of really beautiful produce. So Matt Giese runs the farm. He has very graciously brought down some produce to share, so please feel free to fill up a bag. And we also have a little jar back there for any donations if you feel inclined in a Venmo, if that's easier. And that helps support all of our community programs, because we want to make sure that we are offering those services free of charge to the public. So let's dive in. Paul Stitt once said, "The cure for cancer will not be found under the microscope. It's on the dinner plate." Paul Stitt is an author and a biochemist. He spent most of his career working as a food scientist for some of the country's largest food corporations. And in this book, he really detailed some of the horrifying processes through which the food industry giants influence foods that are entering the American marketplace. So the first thing that I want to point out is that cancer can be really unfair, right? Here I am, a plant-based eater. I'm a fierce believer in daily exercise, and I am at risk for cancer too, right? It doesn't discriminate necessarily. But I think the name of the game in this fight against cancer is really in prevention. So that could be preventing a first-time diagnosis. It could also be preventing degradation of health through treatment. And if you've had cancer before, it could be preventing recurrence of disease, right? What can we do to decrease our risk of that cancer coming back? And really, that prevention is what's centered around the dinner plate. Because what you eat day in and day out has the most profound impact on your health above all other factors. And then our second quote reads, one of the common traits or healing factors among radical remission survivors is the opposite of helplessness is taking control, taking ownership over your health. So Dr. Kelly Turner, actually I'm going to mention her in a second. First I want to point out that that's what I love about food, right? There's so many things that we can't control. If you're here today, even undergoing active treatment, you may not even feel like you have a lot of control over what chemo regimen that you're doing or how frequently you're receiving radiation. But food is really special because food is yours, right? It's your choice. It's your tool. It's your opportunity to promote wellness and optimize your health. So what a wonderful and worthwhile investment that is. So Dr. Kelly Turner wrote a book called Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds. And she writes about people who truly survived their cancer against all odds. These were the outliers, the cases that didn't make a lot of sense, but who were really able to turn around their poor prognosis and achieve wonderful quality of life and a lot more years to live. I can't agree with everything that she writes in this book. She doesn't write about tumor biology, for instance, but I think there's a lot of really impactful and thought-provoking ideas because she documents the trends that these people followed in order to really change the trajectory of their illness. And she summarizes those themes in her book. So it's something that I would recommend to anybody, but if anything, it challenges this idea that we can only do Western medicine, but there's lots of other things that we can do to complement it, right, to optimize our health. So she does have a lot of beautiful analogies in her book, but I wanted to point out one to you today. So she writes about this basement in your house. And let's just say that you walk down into the basement one day and it's dark and moist, and you notice in the far corner of the basement that there's a little patch of mold there. So we're going to say that this mold would represent a treatable cancer, let's say a stage 1 ductal carcinoma, small breast cancer, or maybe a early stage prostate cancer. And so you could excise it. You could just take that piece of the ceiling out, right? That would be surgical intervention. I am married to a surgeon. It's very important to do surgery too. You could also scrape it with a metal scrub brush, like radiation, right? You could spray it down with bleach or whatever, like chemo. Those are all really important. And you should be doing the therapy that your doctor recommends. So that's valuable. But if you walk back upstairs, turn off the light and shut the door, did you change anything about the environment in which the cancer thrived to begin with? What started that cancer, right? So it's possible that you return to that basement a year later or 10 years later or whatever it is, and now your whole basement is covered in mold. So let's just say now you open up all the windows and you let in lots of fresh air. I'm going to equate that to good nutrition, good nutritional therapy, letting all that good stuff in. Well, you just radically change the environment in which had favored the mold growth, right? And then maybe you added a dehumidifier. Let's equate that to stress management. And then you turn on a fan to get good circulation of air, and that's your exercise, right? So lots of things that you can do to radically change the environment so that mold doesn't come back. I do also want to point out that mold can happen in the sunroom. It's total fluke, right? So sometimes you have all the right ingredients and it still happens. And I know that can be the case for some people. So returning to the powerful tool of nutrition and how we can utilize it. Again, my goal here is empowerment. That science in this area of medicine is really rapidly evolving and has given us so many tools. But I want you to be an educated consumer. All right, so as I'm sure most of us can attest to, there's a lot of information available to us at the tips of our fingertips. An abundance of really good, reliable information and a huge abundance of unreliable information. So that can be really hard to navigate. And I think that oncology is a field that is heavily inundated with food myths and even supplement companies that are really taking advantage of a population that is heavily incentivized to optimize their health. So I've seen a lot of patients fall victim to that, and I've also seen a lot of practitioners fall victim to that. So I think that we really have to be informed consumers and educated skeptics in that regard. Fortunately, we can rely on our consensus guidelines. Consensus guidelines are recommendations that are largely developed by the World Cancer Research Fund and its affiliate, which is called the American Institute for Cancer Research. And that's an organization that was founded in 1982 to advance the simple and yet at that time novel notion that you could actually prevent cancer with good healthy diet and exercise and other healthy lifestyle measures. So they are our leading authority in this area, and they have really been invested in investigating that link between diet and lifestyle and cancer risk. They fund an incredible amount of research, over $100 million worth of good, reliable research, and then they compile it into what we call expert reports. We're on our third expert report. It was last published in January of 2018, and that is a decade's worth of good evidence-based literature that is built on now 2 previous decades. And this is a really powerful document because it is inclusive of thousands of peer-reviewed double-blinded studies, systematic reviews, and we can really lean on this information. So in case you're looking for some really juicy late night reading material, it is free to the public. You can download it. It might take a little while. It's over 12,000 pages long. So feel free to look that up. But if you don't feel like reading the 12,000 pages, they do summarize it into our consensus guidelines. And that's the overriding themes that they were able to extrapolate from all of that great literature. So after 12,000 pages of current findings, I would imagine that they would unbury some interesting themes. And they did, because that's what you're looking for in evidence-based literature. You're looking for themes. So if one study says smoking lots helps prevent lung cancer, or drinking lots of Coca-Cola helps prevent diabetes, you know, I want you to take a pause and like think about that for a second. But that's your outlier, right? An American Institute for Cancer Research is not looking for the outlier. They're looking for the other 200 or 2,000 studies that say smoking does increase your risk of developing cancer, or drinking lots of cola increases your risk of developing diabetes. And so that's where we are able to derive our top 10 points of influence, and that is what I'm gonna discuss today, okay? So just to dive right in, what do you think the consensus guidelines say about diet? Well, after 12,000 pages, they did identify a few patterns. And there was definitely an overriding theme here at play. The most prevalent diet-focused theme in all 12,000 pages was a plant-based diet. That is a diet made up mostly of plants. So what does that mean? The diet made mostly up of vegetables, fruit, whole grains, beans and lentils. That includes soy and nuts and seeds. So what's kind of interesting about this is all the studies reviewed kind of had a different approach. Some really focus on all the nutrients that those plants were providing. Well, that's got to help prevent cancer, right? Some focus on the fiber that's going to be found in those foods. And then others, many others, focus on what the plants were substituting, meaning if you ate more plant foods, then you would be eating less animal-based foods. And it's amazing because they all drew the same conclusion, that the more plant foods you had in your diet, the lower your risk for developing cancer. So in addition to containing loads of beneficial vitamins and minerals that help optimize our health, plant foods are a really good concentrated source of something called phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are biologically active compounds that protect your cell against the damage that leads to cancer. That is going to be a really concentrated source. Plant foods are also our very best source of fiber, which optimizes our gut, all the healthy bugs in your gut, and really helps boost your immune function. They can also help us to sustain a healthy weight. And that's an extremely influential variable when it comes to decreasing our risk of cancer. A lot of this also came from nutritional diversity. So when I tell you to, try to break up your routine a little bit and choose a different produce item each week when you go shopping, I want to challenge you to really try to break up your routine. That's so hard because we're such creatures of habit, right? Even I find that it's easy for me to kind of buy the same sorts of things from the store each week. But every time you go to the farm or farmer's market or the grocery store, I want to challenge you to pick out maybe a different vegetable or a different fruit, or it could be a different whole grain. You don't even have to touch the produce, right? And if you lean on whole grain bread, try quinoa, right? Or it could be a different bean, a different lentil. My daughter loves sunflower seeds, so I purposely put pumpkin seeds in her lunch a couple days a week. I would just challenge you to really try to implement that variety because your opportunity for nutritional diversity and benefit increases exponentially when you step outside of your routine. Aim for small steps here. The goal really is sustainability. So for those of you in the audience who are genuine meat and potato lovers, I don't think you have to become a vegan today. But I would start thinking about how you can transition your diet to incorporate more plant foods. I love to focus on adding instead of taking away. So one is decreasing the portion. That's taking away, right? So that was the worst example to start with. But that double could be a single. Or you could swap it out with a healthier double. I don't know. Improving the toppings can have loads of benefit. It's hard to compare cheese, bacon, and fried onion rings with avocado, tomato, and grilled onions. But wow, that's a huge change just right there, right? Swapping out the refined bun for a whole grain alternative, you get loads of benefit just from increasing the fiber in your burger. Improving the sides. If you're unwilling to sacrifice the fries, maybe have a few less fries and a big heaping serving of roasted vegetables or barbecued vegetables or a big salad to help you satisfy your appetite. Consider the protein. So this would be, on the spectrum of influence, probably one of the more influential. But you could swap that beef burger out for a lower fat alternative like bison. It's really flavorful for red meat, so definitely lower in fat. Or it could be a poultry option, maybe a salmon burger or something like that. Now, one step better, right, in terms of improving the optimization of your meal would be a meat analog. It's hard to believe that these meatless meat products that seem like fake food would be better than the meat option, but in terms of cancer, it really is. So that could be an Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger. Those are called in the nutrition industry transition meats because they are meant to transition you to a plant-based option. Doesn't mean you got to get stuck there, but it's really to help propel you to adopt healthy change. And then on the other end of the spectrum, in the favorable side, it would be a plant-based alternative. So that could be a store-bought option, like a black bean burger that comes in a box, or one step better would be something that you would create in your own kitchen, like a black bean burger, a lentil burger. I make a really mean beet burger, and that takes a lot of creative thought process and a lot of creative meal planning So I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, but you can adopt that change, you know, if you're committed to it. Recipes online are so helpful for that because they're rated for you. So you know that if 10,000 people love it and you don't, maybe you messed it up, right? Or a cookbook. I have so many great cookbooks. If you're looking for some ideas, I'd love to share some titles that worked well for my family. But it really does help you think outside of the box in terms of mixing up your routine a bit. I wanted to take a little bit of a tangent on phytoestrogens because that's been the topic of a lot of speculation historically. And we used to be concerned about phytoestrogens because of their chemical composition. But our two most concentrated dietary sources are going to be soy in the form of isoflavones and ground flaxseed in the source of lignans, in the form of lignans. Phytoestrogens are a plant-based nutrient that mimics the female hormone estrogen. And so historically, we were concerned that phytoestrogens had an estrogenic effect or maybe even an anti-estrogenic effect. But what we're finding consistently in the literature is that phytoestrogens have a lot of wonderful benefits. In fact, they have consistently been shown to decrease the risk of all hormone-sensitive cancers. So that includes breast, endometrial, ovarian, and prostate cancer. They have been shown to lower the incidence of disease recurrence, meaning you are less likely to have that cancer come back. They have been shown to reduce the mortality of survivors and therefore increase lifespan. And they've also been shown to enhance the effects of tamoxifen in ER-positive breast cancer. So really powerful, right? There is a couple of caveats. One is that I do think it's important to choose an organic source. Soy is a really common GMO, genetically modified organism. It's a modified crop, and we grow it in abundance in the United States. Both GMOs and even non-GMOs, conventional crops, are often contaminated with pesticides. Even pesticides like Roundup that have been outlawed. It's a very challenging thing for our country to regulate. And unfortunately, that is a group 1 carcinogen. It's called glyphosate, is the chief ingredient in Roundup. So amazingly, those carcinogens get retained all the way from the soil through food processing and onto your plate. So it's best just to really limit that aspect and opt for an organic source. And the only other caveat is that I do think it's important to choose a ground flaxseed in place of flaxseed oil or a whole flaxseed, because that's what's been shown to show the best benefit. A lot of these studies, too, I wanted to mention, have been conducted in both American and Asian populations, and that's actually really important, and it makes it more credible for us because soy has been a part of many Asian cuisines for a really long time. It's relatively new to the American diet, so that's just something that we know increases the credibility of that information. By the way, the first pizza coming out is artichoke spinach pizza. Tasty. I hope you all get to try that, but if not, we're going to catch the rest of you with your next pizza. So. Oh. Yeah, all right, there we go. Okay, so now that we know the most important dietary variable, body weight is the most important lifestyle variable. In fact, as far as lifestyle factors are considered, next to not using tobacco products, maintaining healthy weight is the single most important thing that you can do to reduce your risk of cancer. Okay. The primary reasons for this is that body fat doesn't just sit there. It acts as sort of a hormone pump, kind of stimulating and releasing estrogen into the bloodstream, as well as other hormones like cytokines. Those are pro-inflammatory proteins. That really increase systemic inflammation and kind of create an environment that favors cancer cell initiation and growth. So it's a very influential variable that can really work against your prevention efforts. So this is a tough one, but the saving grace is that this is a variable that we have the power to influence and control, right? I think it really allows for a great platform of goal setting. And I think the government also had this in mind when they updated the food pyramid. because this is our new food pyramid. Did you guys know that? Looks nothing like a pyramid, right? It's called the plate method. So they scrapped the food pyramid. They're like, yeah, no one can even use this. How do you even read the, did you see the last food pyramid? It's like vertical. It's really hard to utilize. So anyway, this is a great update. I think it's a lot more practical and user-friendly. And in a perfect world, your plate would be at least 75% plant foods, right? You got your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, and then that protein source. And ideally, you could utilize a plant-based protein source like beans, nuts, seeds, etc. And since fiber was listed as the #1 nutrient of concern in the dietary guidelines for Americans, it was not protein, it was fiber. 97% of the American population was found to be extremely deficient in fiber. You can bet that that was a primary reason for this change. Because if your plate looked like that every time you sat down, you would probably be getting more than enough fiber too, right? So fiber is my very favorite tool for weight management, and that's because it's my very best tool for weight management. It really helps fill you up. It absorbs water and makes the food heavy in your gut. We tend to eat about the same amount of weight every day. It's kind of interesting, right? So it adds a lot of weight with good nutrition. It's in a wonderful vehicle that also provides an optimization tool for your health. I have a very long history of challenging my patients who are working on this aspect of their life with how can you fit more fiber from a whole food source into your diet? Not necessarily even just with taking away, but how can you incorporate more, right? All right, some additional considerations might include exercising every day. It really helps to create that calorie burning activity on a day-to-day basis, and also building muscle, because that enables us to burn calories even when we're just hanging out on the couch. Limiting your consumption of refined carbohydrates. A refined carbohydrate happens when you take a whole grain carbohydrate with fiber and good nutrition and you strip it, all the good stuff away. You just rip it away. You bleach it out and you take away the nutrients. Sometimes they do refortify whole grains by adding micronutrients back in, but that fiber is no longer there. Okay, and the fiber is one of the really great helpful aspects to it. So that just kind of results in overconsumption because you're not filled up. Your body thinks it needs more food. Making small tweaks that last forever. Again, the goal here is really sustainability. Getting sufficient rest. When we're tired, we want to feel better, and eating helps us feel better. That's good sustenance, right? So I think really making sure that you're resting appropriately and accounting for that. Preparing, making a meal, and probably a grocery list too. It is very hard to be successful in this without adequate preparation. And I think winging it kind of results in piecemealing your food experience together. That isn't always nutritious and probably not as satisfying either. Practicing mindful eating, and what I mean by that is cutting out the distractions, not eating in front of the TV, for instance, but just with the company of the people around you. In front of the computer, that's something I always have to work on. And addressing variables that trigger overeating. So the two that come to mind are sometimes when people get home from work, they're famished and they can't wait to have a nice little snack while they prepare dinner, or maybe you're waiting for dinner and you're snacking. So I would tell you, well, what can we do to eliminate that variable that is contributing to overeating? Maybe packing an apple or handful of almonds in your car or before you leave your office or place of work, so that you're not walking into the door famished, right? And then at least you put some really good food in your body. Another variable that I commonly saw in private practice was when folks watch TV, they sometimes like to enhance the winding down experience by having a snack. And your brain says, oh, that's a good association, eating and watching TV. It is very enjoyable, right? Movie theaters really capitalize on that opportunity. So I would say, okay, you can address that by either limiting yourself to fresh produce when you're watching TV, or you got to break that association altogether and find a new activity until your brain no longer connects the two. Otherwise, you're going to sit in front of the TV and be thinking about the snack you should be having, right? So read a book, maybe get some work done after dinner instead, something that breaks the association. All of those things are very workable. Challenging, but workable. Number 3, limit consumption of fast food and highly processed foods, high in fat, starches, and sugars. Limiting these foods really help to control calorie intake and help you to maintain a healthy weight. Again, the primary feature here made clear by research is that overweight and obesity contribute to cancer, our cancer risk, right? So we really have to focus on those foods that have a lot of calories in a relatively small package, so they're easy to eat or drink, and they don't necessarily give us any good nutrition. So that's convenience foods and soda and things like that. Secondary to weight control, animal-based saturated fat, cholesterol, and trans fat are all strongly correlated with cancer. So that means that saturated fat coming from meat and dairy products, trans fat that comes from fried foods and from processed foods, and then refined carbohydrates from sweets and other convenience foods, even sweetened beverages, all have their own relationship with our cancer risk. So essentially you have to limit those variables that are really creating an environment like your moldy basement, and focus on the things that optimize the environment. Number 4, limit consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Drink mostly water and unsweetened drinks. So again, this has to do with empty calories that lead to weight gain. The other factor here, which I didn't mention on the last slide, is these foods also are very effective at triggering acute inflammation. And that inflammation is, again, setting the environment, right? That favors cancer cell initiation and growth. Sugar-sweetened beverages, we actually include artificially sweetened beverages in that category now. Don't satisfy our appetite in the same way that food does, and can really promote overconsumption of calories, especially more sugar without offering any nutrition. So, speaking of water, I highly encourage you to filter your water. Some of you may have heard me mention this before. It is not yet a consensus guideline, but we are accumulating a lot of evidence about this that I think is meaningful, because it's not uncommon for tap water to be contaminated with certain constituents that probably should be limited. You can access an annual consumer confidence report through your district. The Environmental Protection Agency requires that that document is published and made available to the public by July 1st of every year. And it spells out how frequently each constituent is monitored, the levels that are detected, and then a reference range that includes not only an action limit, but also a public health goal. And those are two very different things, right? So when that report is published, which also includes the results of the previous year, you're going to find that some things are not regularly regulated yearly, but rather once every 3 years. So lead, for instance, is one of those constituents. And if it's high, you're going to find out in May or June of 2026, right? It's kind of a waiting game there. That's one reason to filter your water. There's also a number of constituents that are have some pretty high levels that are beyond our public health goal. They are lower than the levels that are dictated by the Environmental Protection Agency that require that those water sources that are diluted. So that's another reason to filter your water. And then finally, we have a new public health threat called a PFAS compound that stands for per and polyfluorinated substances. This is a group of chemicals that are used to make all kinds of really helpful products in industry, things that are resistant to heat and stains and oil, grease, you name it, but they don't break down, right? They're resilient in their product, and that's why they don't break down in the environment. So they're really notorious for contaminating water sources as well as fish and wildlife, and the soil as well. And it's very hard to not only monitor those effectively, but also filter them out effectively at the community level. So they are building a water treatment facility in Atascadero that is intended to address this issue, but that's probably the last and the biggest reason to filter your water. Okay? And our community has lots of good resources on this as well. Number 5, daily exercise. Be physically active as part of everyday life. Move more and sit less. Exercise helps us achieve and sustain a healthy weight. It boosts immune properties, helps our immune system, right? And it optimizes overall physical and mental health even during treatment. So if you are undergoing treatment, this is still a wonderful tool for you. Scientists recommend that we aim for about 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity a week. So it's over the course of the week. So if you're going to break that down into a daily number, that would be about 20 minutes a day of moderate exercise or 10 minutes a day of vigorous exercise. And so for cancer prevention and weight control, that number does increase a little bit. The more exercise you get, the more benefit you have. So you could aim for 30 minutes a day. It could be a walk or something like that. I think you have to figure out what's feasible for you and also sustainable. Can even be broken up into different segments of your day. I would just figure out what's sustainable for you. And then you could go to 60 or even up to 90 minutes a day for additional benefit. I know that's not feasible for many people. So I would just figure out what's going to be sustainable for your routine and what can your body tolerate too, right? So if you're naturally a more sedentary person, thinking about 20 minutes of exercise every day might feel overwhelming and require an adjustment. But I think just like changing our diet, which is really hard to do, it deserves a lot of thought and intention. Figure out a plan in order to make that a feasible part of your routine. So first of all, I would just suggest to start moving, right? Sometimes that's the hardest step. But I love that Nike motto, just do it. Because if you think about it too long, you might talk yourself out of it, right? Just put on your walking shoes and leave your house. Be successful. Number 2 would be making a plan. And I mean, really setting up some realistic goals and creating a space in your schedule too that allows this to be a sustainable part of your routine. Starting easy, you don't have to go out for a marathon, right? Mix up your routine, maybe invest in trying to make it seem interesting to you or fun, right? That would be really ideal. And then lastly, keep going, keep at it. I think being consistently active is all about mindset and thinking about it as sort of an investment in yourself, not necessarily a task or a chore to be completed. Finding a friend to help you stay accountable can be a really important aspect of that. Number 6, limit consumption of red and processed meat. Eat no more than moderate amounts of red meat, such as beef, pork, and lamb. If you're wondering what moderate means, that equates about 12 to 18 ounces of cooked meat in a week. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the risk is eliminated at that quantity. It just means that there is a significant measurable increase in risk beyond that amount. So that's kind of like your threshold. And studies are finding that there's a number of different variables that really contribute to that concern. However, the 3 most concerning and the 3 that are easiest to pinpoint include insulin-like growth factor 1. So we abbreviate that as IGF-1. This is actually the body's natural hormonal response to the metabolism of animal-based protein, so how your body uses it. We find that malignant cells, cancer cells, are covered in IGF-1 receptors, which is really interesting, right? So this has been shown across numerous bodies of research to fuel cancer growth. Secondly, and thirdly, would be heterocyclic amines and polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons. You don't need to remember those 2 words. But these are known carcinogens that are formed when you cook animal protein. So the higher the heat and the longer the cooking time, the more carcinogens are generated, particularly in those 2 forms. And then lastly, byproducts of digestion are formed actually by the bacteria in your large intestine when you are digesting animal protein, and that byproduct is a known carcinogen. Okay. Eat little, if any, processed meat. So processed meats, in case you're wondering what that means, that's anything that has been smoked, cured, salted, fermented, or had preservatives added to them. So that would be like deli meat, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, so on and so forth. The American Institute for Cancer Research goes on to recommending avoiding those altogether. So they actually categorize that in the same category as tobacco products. Avoid altogether. So I think it's best to avoid consumption, obviously, but if you're going to eat processed meats, I would implement a couple of ideas, or consider a couple ideas. One would be taking a peek at the ingredients list and just making sure there's not added carcinogens to that. So that would be like nitrates and nitrites. Celery powder is a really sneaky nitrate. So just make sure it's not anything added to it, right? And then another idea would be to cook a chicken, right? And then slice it up and put that on your sandwich instead. But if you're going to go one step further, it would be substituting it with a plant-based option, like a nut butter or tofu, meat analog even, beans, lentils, right? Because that risk goes away when you substitute it with a plant-based option. All right, just dropping bombs right and left. Sorry, guys. All right, number 7. For cancer prevention, it's best not to drink alcohol. I feel like bearer of bad news here. So unfortunately, this is definitely an area where the consensus guidelines have shifted over the last 10 years, shifted downwards. American Institute for Cancer Research has now identified alcohol as the 3rd leading modifiable risk factor that increases cancer risk after tobacco use and excess body weight. So it's right up there, I know. Because they have found that even less than 1 drink a day of any kind of alcohol increases the measurable risk of most common cancers, whereas a reduction in alcohol consumption measurably lowers the risk. So scientists are still trying to figure this out. What about it? What about alcohol measurably increases cancer risk? The 3 most clear variables are that, number 1, ethanol, which is the alcohol that's found in alcoholic beverages, is a recognized carcinogen that can lead to DNA damage. So there's number 1. Number 2 is ethanol can help potential carcinogens enter the cell. So they kind of open up the door and invite in the carcinogens. And then lastly is alcohol, ethanol, reduces the absorption of protective micronutrients like folate, antioxidants, that sort of thing. So let's say you sat down to a wonderful, delicious meal of barbecue chicken and you had a beautiful salad filled with greens and berries and all the good stuff and a glass of red wine. Sounds like a typical good American meal, right? Well, the ethanol in that wine would kind of work against you because first of all, it's a carcinogen, right? We know that. There's carcinogen number 1. And then it kind of opens up the door for the barbecue chicken, the carcinogens in that, to make their way into the cell. And it worked against you by resisting or blocking the helpful antioxidants in your salad from providing the protective benefit it would have otherwise provided if there was no wine there. So it's like a triple whammy. So while American Institute for Cancer Research recommends you shouldn't be drinking at all, the recommendations do recognize that no matter what they say, people are going to do what they want, right? So there's a few guidelines I think to consider if you do decide to partake. So if you do drink, I think your first thought should just be to limit it altogether. So if you're normally a 2-drink kind of day person, obviously going down from there would be really helpful, having 1 drink instead and really kind of working on that. And then to take it a step further would be on non-consecutive days, right? So if you go out on Sunday night or Saturday night, I don't know, have a glass of wine, try to wait a few days before you do that again. And then next would be capping it, right? Historically, actually, our recommendations limited alcohol to 2 drinks a day for men, 1 drink a day for women. So that's kind of like your threshold. So one of the most common questions I get is, hey, I thought red wine was really good for my heart. I have heart disease in my family. And that is true, but unfortunately that benefit only exists for a really small subset of our population, which is women over the age of 55. And the benefit is eliminated after 2 glasses of red wine in a week. So it's 5 units of alcohol. And then the risk for cancer overrides the protective effect against your heart. So it's really a small subset. But fortunately, it's the polyphenols in red wine that's providing you all those wonderful protective effects for your heart, right? The benefits. And polyphenols are found in lots of plant foods. Walnuts, green tea, grapes, berries, citrus fruits, apples, whole grains, peanuts. There's lots of sources of that. My personal favorite would be chocolate. In fact, you know those little Ghirardelli squares? That has 3 times the amount of polyphenols than what you would find in 1 5-ounce glass of red wine. So you might as well just eat chocolate. All right, we're nearing the end. Home stretch. Don't use supplements for cancer prevention. Aim to meet your nutritional needs through a healthy, well-balanced diet. For the most part, supplements are not helpful at all for preventing cancer. There are some supplements, however, that are good tools for health optimization. For instance, if you have a vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, it's probably in your best interest to correct that deficiency with supplementation. You should know, by the way, how much vitamin D you really need, right? And you would know that with a blood test to determine your level of vitamin D, and then asking your doctor or your friendly dietitian how much is appropriate. Another example would be supplemental folate, which is really helpful in supporting a healthy pregnancy. There's also a lot of research demonstrating the benefit of supplemental probiotics, especially for cases of chronic GI issues like diarrhea and constipation. So there's lots of exceptions to that. But I want you to ask yourself 4 questions if you decide to supplement with anything, with something. So first of all, why am I taking this? Is it because my friend said it was great and I'd be rejuvenated? I don't know. But you should really have a valid reason, like why are you supplementing? Secondly, what are the benefits versus the risks? There's always a cost, you guys, and it's usually not limited to a financial cost. Right? So what are the benefits and the risks of supplementing? Thirdly is how much should I take? And then how long should I be taking it? Most supplements are not intended to be taken lifelong. Vitamin D might be an exception to that, but most supplements are in fact short-term. Okay, it's not a lifelong need. Keep in mind that the supplement industry is an entirely unregulated multi-billion-dollar industry. So they're really good at convincing you that you need things that you could otherwise be getting in a whole food source that has very limited side effects. And this is, again, a population of people that are heavily incentivized to benefit their health. In every good myth, there's a degree of truth, right? So I just want you to be educated. One of the strategies I would recommend is checking for seals of approval on your supplements. There's actually 3 primary organizations that do a lot of rigorous testing and also show that the ingredients in the supplement are in fact in the supplement and not like a compilation of houseplants and other weird things. That does happen, by the way. So these 3 organizations are consumerlab.com, NSF International, it stands for National Sanitation Foundation, and then also US Pharmacopoeia or USP. So you'll find a little label on your supplement if it has one of these seals of approval that, again, what is in that supplement is actually like what's promised to you. It does not mean that these organizations demonstrate safety or effectiveness. Those 2 are out of the equation. It's just that they are not contaminated and spoiled, things like that. you can actually purchase a analysis to consumerlab.com if you're really curious about fish oil, for instance. They have a report that you can purchase for $30 unless you get a subscription, which is $60 a year. That will show you the analysis of the 300 supplements that they tested. So some of these are really great resources if you are a supplement person. I do also want to point out that supplements are very unsafe with regard to cancer. So the most notorious of examples of this would be supplemental antioxidants like beta carotene and vitamins A, C, and E. We have, and super green products too. Super green products would be in that category. What research has found is that antioxidants have the potential in a supplemental potent form to be pro-oxidants, which is really going to work against your efforts, right? And they can also be really effective at protecting the cancer cell. So food doesn't do that, but supplements can. So just make sure that when in doubt, you are finding a nutritious whole food source and really trying to aim to diversify your diet as much as possible. And then, of course, correct any deficiencies that you may have. Number 9, for mothers, breastfeed your baby if you can. Breastfeeding is so good for the mom and the baby. Has loads of protective benefits, again, for the mom and the baby when it comes to decreasing your risk of cancer. And last, and certainly not least, avoid tobacco and excess sun. I'm not going to go into the details about tobacco's effects on cancer risk. Most of us are already aware of that, but avoiding excess sun exposure is a really critical aspect of limiting cancer risk because skin damage can often lead to cancer cell initiation. So what about vitamin D? You might be aware that our best source is in fact the sun. So you could sit outside with some skin exposed for 10 to 15 minutes and soak up a little vitamin D that way. There are some food sources, but very limited actually. It really is limited to fortified products and small fatty fish that have a good source of vitamin D. So then that just comes down to supplementation. So our current recommended daily allowance is between 600 and 800 international units a day. I did my master's in this topic actually, and I will be the first to admit that that's probably not enough for most of us. We're actively working to change those numbers. Most people probably need 1, if not 2,000 IUs a day, sometimes more. But you do not want to oversupplement with vitamin D. The consequences of that are just as serious as undersupplementing. So make sure your next routine blood draw to have that tacked onto your panel and figure out what that number is and continue to monitor that until the deficiency or insufficiency is corrected. All right, here's my top 10 steps to optimize your health. Number 1, take control of your health. Be an advocate, right? Number 2, eat a fruit or a vegetable at every meal and try to mix it up. Try to reach for a different item. Number 3, more filtered water, less alcohol, less sugar-sweetened beverages. Number 4, replace a meat with beans, nuts, or seeds, or another plant-based protein source as often as possible and as often as feasible. Number 5, eat real food. And what I mean by that is it should not have a nutrition facts label on it. But if it did, the ingredients would all be recognizable foods, not a whole bunch of things you cannot pronounce and you have no idea what they are, right? And in addition to that, aim for organic when accessible and reasonable for you. Number 6, be as lean as possible, as lean as you can. Number 7, enjoy your food and the meal experience. Remember that indulgences are a really important part of life, right? And I didn't emphasize that because it's sadly not in the consensus guidelines, but it should be, right? Because food is how we connect with each other. It's how we socialize and celebrate. And that is a really profound thing that's important to address. So just because I'm making all these recommendations here doesn't mean that you can't partake in indulgences too. That's such an important part of life. This pizza is, let's make sure we get everybody that maybe didn't get a sample before too, is the margarita pizza. Okay, number 8, be mindful of portion sizes when you are consuming calorie-dense foods. And by that, I don't mean avocado, but rather pie, right? So things that maybe aren't offering you a lot of nutrition. Just be mindful of your portion size. Number 9, be active every day. Move more, sit less, really challenge yourself with mobility. And then lastly, aim to be an educated consumer, but try not to stress about it. Because there's always things that you can do to improve. I can think of 5 things that I mentioned today that I really try to be mindful of that are hard for me. So it's just a constant work in progress. 10 is a lot of things. I know that. So if I was going to focus just on 4 of those, I would choose not using tobacco products, aiming for a healthy weight, getting a half-hour daily exercise, and eating healthier. And what I mean by eating healthier is more whole plant foods, okay? Because those 4 factors alone account for 80% of all disease. Not just cancer, but heart disease, diabetes, you name it. So if you can optimize those 4 things, you're going to decrease your risk of all disease by 80%. That's pretty amazing, right? So again, that would be more wholesome plant foods, getting a half-hour a day of daily exercise, aiming for a healthy weight, and no tobacco products. Okay? All right. Just to wrap things up, best cancer-fighting foods. So it's obviously not about a single magic bullet food, but rather a combination of plant-based foods that really provide the best benefit, right? So top of the list, I'm going to put Allium family foods and cruciferous family foods. So that would be like garlic and onions, and these are like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale. The star player for this would probably be garlic, and the best 2 are probably broccoli and cabbage. It's very hard to choose, though. They're all amazing for you. That is such an amazing group of foods because they offer some really phenomenal chemopreventive properties. They suppress inflammation, they stimulate our immune function, they block cancer cell growth. Just incredible, right? Turmeric has a really brightly colored pigment called curcumin. And this is another really incredible food. Probably has some of the most promising chemopreventive properties by helping to prevent DNA mutations and triggering apoptosis of the cancer cell. Apoptosis is a fancy way of saying a programmed cell death. So it sees the yucky cell and it says die, right? So it's a really phenomenal food. Green tea offers powerful antioxidants that interfere with every stage of cancer cell growth, including the initiation. Wow, multi-layered benefit right there. Ground flaxseed, I mentioned to you, the lignans are just a beautiful, potent phytoestrogen. Lots of really good properties in those. Nutritional yeast, my favorite thing to put on popcorn, has a wonderful cheesy flavor and has some really remarkable abilities to stimulate your immune system. Great for the common cold too, by the way. Berries, especially darker berries like blueberries, are packed with all kinds of antioxidants, so pigments, which not only attenuate inflammation, but really improve insulin sensitivity as well. And walnuts are probably the most nutritious of all the nuts because they have some of the highest antioxidants and also really beautiful anti-inflammatory profile. And then I just grouped together all other vegetables because I couldn't decide, especially leafy greens and tomatoes, lots of antioxidants, lots of anti-inflammatory properties in those. And of course, beans and lentils deserve a spot on this list because they're probably our most concentrated food in fiber. And we know that fiber is also really, really wonderful for our health, a very powerful prebiotic as well. So in our culture, we don't talk about these things nearly as much as we should, but your mental and physical health have a really huge impact on your immune system. And I can't tell you how many people have told me that they are convinced their stress is what caused their cancer. I think you have to remember that aspect I talked about in changing the environment in which cancer thrives, right? Changing the basement. So a couple of considerations include deepening your spiritual connection, deepening your relationship with God, right? Really thinking about that higher element. Working through feelings that you've been suppressing can really liberate yourself from the weight of that you carry through life. Increasing positive emotions, meaning increasing the positive framework through which you see your life. My favorite tool for this personally is a gratitude journal. Every time I start feeling like I'm getting very pessimistic about the world, I keep a gratitude journal. And I try to do that for a month or so. But I think that positive thinking is a muscle, and you have to exercise it in order for it to be strong, right? And embracing social support. I think a lot of us are caregivers, and it can be really hard to accept support. But that being said, not only do we all need support at times, but you're also robbing someone else the gift of giving and supporting you. And identifying a strong reason for living. So this might offer you the reason why you are putting in all the hard work to invest in your health, right? Why are you doing that? All right. Oh, follow your intuition too. That was another thing. All right. Questions. Thank you for making it through all that material with me. What questions do you have? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I also wanted to mention that this pizza is the arugula pear pizza. Oh, just kidding. Margarita pizza. I'm going to do questions. Yes. Yeah. Hey.
So I take a turmeric supplement.
Yeah.
Can I get from a natural alternative? What do you think about that as a form of turmeric?
Yeah. The question was a turmeric supplement. So what are the ideas about turmeric supplementation? Turmeric, sadly, is not very bioavailable. It's actually really hard to absorb and utilize. So we have found a couple of aspects that can really enhance that property. One would be pairing that turmeric supplement with fat. It is a fat-soluble nutrient. So if you just down it with a glass of water, you're not going to absorb any of it probably, right? So if you had it with a meal, chances are there's a little bit of fat in your meal. You probably could absorb it better. Another thing that actually really enhances absorption is black pepper. In fact, on the Consumer Lab resource, they did an analysis on turmeric supplementation, and they found the Kirkland signature turmeric paired with black pepper was by far the best, especially in terms of bioavailability. That being said, I am a little concerned about supplementing with antioxidants. I mentioned to you earlier that supplemental antioxidants become pro-oxidants in a supplemental form. They're not in a balanced form with checks and balances like you would see in food. And they can also be really effective at protecting cancer cells. So I really hesitate to utilize turmeric supplementation. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just my own personal hesitation. I want you to have the whole picture, you know. So if you do that, one idea is maybe not to do it daily, and just really aim to incorporate it more as a culinary tool. So making more curries and finding opportunities to add it into your food. I found a turmeric granola that was amazing. So that would be one way to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Vitamin D.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Vitamin D is a great supplement.
D.
Yeah, vitamin D. Oh, did you say D?
E.
E.
D. Like Donna.
D like Donna. Okay. So yes, vitamin D is a great supplement, and I do recommend it, especially if you are deficient or insufficient in your vitamin D status. The only way to really determine that is with a blood test. So I would just ask your doctor the next time you get routine blood work to have it tacked onto your panel, because it's an easy add-on, and then you know where you're standing, right, and how much you need to correct it. So that would be part 2, is finding out the appropriate quantity to correct the deficiency. There are 2 vitamin D supplements. There's vitamin D3 and vitamin D2. You want vitamin D3. D2 is actually the plant-based vitamin D. The main source is mushrooms. It's just not nearly as bioavailable. So if you are going to supplement with vitamin D, I would recommend D3. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
Mine might be a good follow-on there. You mentioned, try not to take excess vitamin D, but I supplements, then you would just, excrete it. So
Sure.
is that not the case with D?
That is true for most water-soluble vitamins. However, vitamin D is fat-soluble. So you will retain it and you store it in your fat. It can become kind of sequestered in your body fat as well as in your liver. And vitamin D toxicity is a real thing that is probably more common than we realize. So your body just utilizes it well in terms of hanging on to excess. That's why you have to be careful. Yeah. Yeah.
Your D and K are good
Um, yeah, I think they're just binding it though. It's not necessarily a K supplement, it's a D supplement.
Yeah, well, they come separately. I have mine separately.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, I don't think that many people need vitamin K, but we could talk about that at another time. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's like a helpful, necessary thing, personally. Yeah.
You talked a lot about getting fiber from food. Is there anything particularly wrong with using fiber supplements?
Yeah, I think fiber supplements are a great added tool. I mean, in terms of vitamin K, I would say eat more leafy greens, so I would say with fiber, eat more fibrous food. Sometimes that food is not always well tolerated, especially if you have a sensitive gut or you're going through treatment too, and the chemo is hard on your gut. That's a very real experience. So in that case, finding a fiber supplement that's gentle, I can recommend a few. If you're interested, you're welcome to ask me. Some don't ferment in your gut, and so they don't give you gas and discomfort. But I just wouldn't say that it comes in a package of good nutrition. It's really just fiber, so it doesn't provide all of the health benefits that the fiber in food would provide. It's really just a tool to absorb water in your gut. So sometimes people who are using a pain medication or any other number of things, maybe they have a motility disorder with their gut, they suffer from chronic constipation, things like that, will take a lot of fiber supplements, and then it just sits there like a rock in your gut. So it's like one piece of the puzzle, right? So I don't want to tell you it's bad, but I would just be careful how you utilize it. Yeah. Yes, I'll come back to you for sure. Yes.
So I typically make fire cider, which has turmeric and garlic and all that kind of stuff. Is that doing anything to help?
I don't have an educated opinion about fire cider, but that sounds amazing. You'll have to tell me about that. Yeah.
I haven't heard about coffee.
Ooh. Yeah. I'm going to try to unpack that in a summarized way. I think that coffee has lots of antioxidants and polyphenols. There's a lot of wonderful properties about coffee, especially if you utilize it in kind of a healthful way. Some of us have a tendency to add a lot of sugar and cream, and we can very easily convert coffee that's good and natural and healthy into something that's quite different, right? But I think that a limited amount could certainly provide some benefit as long as it wasn't working against you and your tolerance. So many people suffer from acid reflux, just as an example, and they drink a cup of coffee every day. That is probably the thing that's causing their acid reflux. It takes you about 10 hours to really metabolize that caffeine. And even if you're getting acid reflux later in the day, it was probably the cup of coffee you had in the morning. And then they end up taking a proton pump inhibitor or H2 blocker later, a medication, in order to curb that effect. So clearly, and this is very, very common, which is why I mention it. So clearly, like, your stomach isn't tolerating the coffee, and it's not a great tool for you. Very difficult to eliminate coffee. I understand that. I'm one of those people. It just doesn't work for my gut at all. But if you tolerate it, you don't have any chronic GI issues at all, and you're limiting it to, I think, an appropriate amount, which is probably 1 cup a day, then it could offer you a lot of healthful benefits. Does that kind of seem like a fair response? Yes.
How old is your cute little friend now?
Oh, she's 5 years old. Yeah. She wanted to be here to serve pizzas. Yeah.
So when I go to Costco or Target, there's these huge canisters of whey protein. So is it whey or no whey?
I like that. Spin on words. No way. No, I'm not a believer in whey protein. There is some conflicting evidence about whey. A long time ago, there was this pretty influential study that found it could help with especially hormone-sensitive cancers. That's been totally myth busted. And we are concerned that the dairy protein, which is whey and casein, those are the two dairy proteins, actually do increase our risk of developing cancer, hormone-sensitive and non-hormone sensitive. And I think it's also about the way in which you utilize it, right? So if you have whey protein in your smoothie once a week, it's probably not going to change anything because it's what you do day to day that really makes the biggest impact on your health. So if you are a protein supplement person, maybe mixing it up. Not only are those products largely unregulated and they have found to have all kinds of crazy contaminants in those products, but it's probably not a great protein source. That's especially true for the oncology population because it has a tendency to decrease the density of your smoothie, meaning that if you add whey to it, it makes it fluffier and it fills up all this space in your stomach without adding a lot of nutrition. You can only fit so much in your stomach at a time. So it's never been a tool that I've utilized in the people that are going through treatment and want some extra protein. So I'm just kind of a whole food source kind of gal, right? So I could talk for a long time about that if you're interested in protein supplements. Yeah.
The benefits of mushrooms, how does that
Ooh.
work?
That's such a good question. The benefits of mushrooms. I'm a huge fan of Mighty Cap mushrooms. Just a little shout out to Chris Battle. He is such a dedicated mushroom farmer in our community, does a really beautiful job. And you don't even have to wash those mushrooms because they're grown in a sterile environment other than the mycelium block, which is used to grow the mushroom. You just throw them in your pan. Can you imagine not washing your mushrooms? All the other mushrooms are grown in manure. So, but I think they have a load of potential benefit. I don't know all of those benefits yet, so I'm kind of curious to see all the evidence that will amount over the next 10 years. I think there could be some really good potential there. I'm not a huge fan of utilizing the tinctures until we have more information about how that really impacts our health. But you do need to cook them, though. They should be cooked. You shouldn't be eating raw mushrooms. Yeah, I'm not there yet. I'd love to see more information before we supplement with mushrooms. Yeah.
The flaxseed, why should it be ground?
Well, flaxseed in a whole form has a really hard husk, a shell, and your body can't break it down. So it really has to be ground in order to utilize all that wonderful fat and phytoestrogens. And it'll come out the same way it went in otherwise. And then flaxseed oil actually has a little bit of concerning information. There was a really influential study that was published about prostate cancer. The flaxseed oil shown to speed up cancer cell proliferation with flaxseed oil. So I just don't think it's probably a safe option for most of us because who knows what else it does. So I just would lean on a ground source until we have more information. Yes. Yeah.
I haven't heard you mention too much about dairy products. You mentioned it like once.
Yeah.
But you did say something about probiotics, and
Yeah.
I eat yogurt.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what is your recommendation on that?
Yeah.
Would you have whole milk yogurt? And I get organic,
Yeah.
And it seems to help me. I think maybe it helps utilize calcium because I notice that when I'm eating yogurt, I don't have the cramps at night.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is about yogurt and dairy products in general. So dairy products are kind of a mixed bag. It is obviously, a source of calcium. It is a source of saturated fat and cholesterol, and we know that animal-based saturated fat and cholesterol are correlated with increased cancer risk. So that is a concerning variable that I have about that. Same with the protein that we find in dairy products is concerning. We know that there is a correlation there between cancer risk and animal-based protein. However, yogurt is in a special little category. Because all of the research that was conducted about yogurt was very positive, especially for osteoporosis. It was the only dairy product that was recommended in terms of promoting bone health and decreasing our risk of developing osteoporosis. So I think yogurt is a great food, and I am all for plant-based with the addition of yogurt. But I would probably opt for a low-fat source because then you can limit your risk of the fat and cholesterol, but still get the benefits of yogurt. Unfortunately, plant-based yogurts are just not up to par quite yet. Maybe in the future. Yes, and it's a great probiotic, absolutely, especially kefir. In fact, you can look for the probiotic benefit on the ingredients list. If that product adds all kinds of gums and thickeners and emulsifiers, it probably doesn't have a lot of probiotics in it because those are intended to thicken the product. The probiotics should be in sufficient quantity to thicken the product. So you know that it is probably a good probiotic if it doesn't have all these gums and thickeners, right? So, yes, back there.
Where did you get your vitamin B12?
Vitamin B12?
Where did you get it?
Well, if you have a clinical deficiency, then you can talk to your doctor about that. There are injections, but you could also supplement with it. And I think that's a really important consideration on a plant-based diet. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, you can't get B12.
Right, and they are in a lot of fortified products, luckily. So that's where most of us actually get probably the bulk of our B12. But some people also have a harder time utilizing and retaining it. So I think that a vitamin B12 supplement is a really important consideration. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah.
I have a question. You said that drinking things like with sweeteners and sugar is bad. What are your thoughts on like stevia or like agave and sweetening drinks and stuff?
Yeah.
Like those types of sweeteners?
That's such a great question. The question was about, sorry, I'm not always good at repeating the question, is about sweetening drinks using natural sweeteners like agave or stevia, right? So stevia has gotten a little bit of negative press lately. It is an artificial sweetener, so it's non-nutritive, meaning it doesn't have any calories. It is very sweet, probably 600 times sweeter than normal sugar. So the downside to using artificial sweeteners like stevia is it can change your taste profile and make your brain think it needs sweeter foods than you actually need. So you just become more attracted and magnetized to sweeter foods. So that's probably our biggest concern about non-nutritive sweeteners, which is why we group it into that category of drinking, just water or unsweetened drinks. However, you could sweeten things with things like agave. Agave is kind of cool because it has a very low glycemic index impact, meaning it doesn't turn into sugar very quickly in your blood. It also has some antioxidants, which is cool. I think date sugar is another consideration for that. It has tons of antioxidants, probably our most nutritive sweetener. And that is if you really wanted to sweeten something, right? Honey is another consideration. Oh, monk fruit? Okay, cool. Yeah, interesting. Maple syrup just probably hits your blood sugar a little harder, but at least it's a natural sweetener. Yeah, it's a spectrum, right? So, yeah. Back here, that's what yeah.
What do you think about fermented foods? The cabbage.
Yeah, fermented foods. I think that fermented foods can offer you tons of benefits. It's obviously a great probiotic, which has bacteria in the product that's symbiotic with your gut. It's also a great prebiotic, which feeds all that healthy bacteria, as long as it's not packaged with a ton of salt. Because we know that probably having a lot of salt in our diet isn't good for our health. So it's just, you have to be mindful of that aspect, but it's all a balance, right? So yeah, great potential there. Yeah.
Can you talk on collagen? Added powder?
Yeah, collagen. That's a really good question, and I don't have probably a really well balanced, educated viewpoint on that. So I would have to study up on it and see what the current literature is. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes.
You mentioned mindful eating.
Yeah.
Anybody still has their Costco flyer that came out?
Yeah.
Last week, I think it was. Excellent article on mindful eating.
Okay, great.
The whole gamut of what you said, nicely done.
Cool. So she mentioned, awesome. She mentioned that there's a pamphlet that Costco sends out.
Yeah.
Or is it a magazine? Costco Connection?
It's not their big one, it's their little flyer.
Okay, cool. It was an excerpt on mindful eating. It had some really great ideas. Awesome. Thank you. Yes.
What about milk alternatives? Oat milk, almond milk, soy milk?
Yeah.
What is your feeling about those? Which ones cover the same use for like in the morning coffee?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you wanted to make a cited cream or soup or add maybe like natural flavors.
Sure. Yeah, the question was on plant-based milks, which might be the most beneficial. I would choose an organic option, and then whichever one you like the best. So, yeah, I think oat milk has the most neutral flavor. So when you add it to things where a plant-based milk shouldn't otherwise belong, like coffee, for instance, it doesn't tend to overpower the flavor, but with this plant-based option. That being said, some are more fortified than others. So if you're utilizing it as a tool to really improve your calcium intake, that could be a consideration. Because plant-based milks can be an amazing source of calcium. So you'd have to look at that aspect, right? How much calcium is really added? And that's at the very bottom of the nutrition facts label. Sure, yeah. So cashew has a nice neutral flavor. Sure, yeah. And so the other aspect I would mention is how much sugar is added. So if that's something that you want to be mindful about, it's certainly a consideration. And one other consideration is with soy milk. It is probably the only plant-based milk other than pea protein, I guess, that would incorporate more protein. So if you're concerned about that in your diet, which you probably, if you are concerned, you probably don't need to be concerned, but that would be. Yes, that's true.
But it's been a long time since I've tried soy milk, but I tried it a decade ago.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Improved it since.
Sure. There's lots of brands. I don't know if that's the best source of phytoestrogens. I would probably tell you to lean into a ground flaxseed or edamame, organic or edamame instead. Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah.
I have two questions. What about honey for a sweetener?
Well, I am a passionate beekeeper, so I'm extremely biased. I love honey. It does impact your blood sugar, so use in moderation, but those bees are pretty amazing. It's better than refined sugar for sure, yes. Ooh, really good question. I'd have to figure it out. Does anybody know? An acid? That's true. The two usually go together. Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you're a kimchi fan or something like that, then use in moderation. Maybe that's the key to those fermented foods. Awesome.
And you have to have a certain ratio of,
yeah.
It has to be sea salt, can't be iodized. So take a certain amount of salt per pound of cabbage in order to make the process work. So
yeah,
you got to do it with salt.
It's tricky. So if there's no way around that, I would just say eat it in moderation, right? That is the salt of your diet.
I used to have a salt issues. I get too much water and I ate whole foods and stuff, so I didn't get a lot of extra salt. So So I know I can eat the fermented food
Uh-huh.
that was fermented.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have to worry about it. But do you know what our salt average should be?
Oh, goodness. Couple thousand milligrams a day. Most of us reach that number very quickly without adding any salt to our food at all, because most foods do have sodium in it. So it's really easy to pass that number. Yeah, but that's probably appropriate for most people. Yeah.
What foods would you say support sleep that we would eat in the evening before going to bed?
That's such a good question. What foods support sleep? I hesitate to recommend a beverage for obvious reasons, but I've actually read some interesting things about kiwis to really help promote good restful sleep. I really hesitate with melatonin because the physiologic dose for melatonin is about 0.75 milligrams. You can't even find that in a toddler supplement. So the supplement industry really takes advantage of us. And if you are supplementing with melatonin, chances are is 3, 5, if not 10 milligrams, which way exceeds our daily allowance. So I would really address that and try to work it down. But, oh goodness, I would say maybe eating earlier in the evening. And if you're able to have a little walk after dinner to really promote digestion by the time you go to bed. That's a great question. That's something I'd have to look more into. Cherries are? Oh, wonderful. Okay, cherries and pistachios. Those might be some good food-based tools. Yeah. So, a high carb, high fat diet before you go to bed. Nice. Ties you over all night long. Yeah. Can you have too many blueberries? And what do I think of? Oh, monk sugar? I don't have an educated opinion on monk sugar. Yeah, I'd have to look into that. Can you eat too much of anything? Probably, right? Too much of anything is probably not a great thing, but blueberries are an amazing food. So that being said, yeah, yes.
And there's something recently about not eating pears and bananas because of the...
It decreases the absorption. Yeah, I know. There's so many things. No. Just do your best. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you here. Thank you. And thank you to Doctors Linda and Mark Mulder for the amazing pizza. They did this all on their own accord with the support of Leah and her beautiful girls, too. All right. Have a great day.